Welcome back to Sleepy Pages of History. Tonight, the modern world fades away. Your breath slows down. The air in your room grows cool and still. Take a moment to settle deep into your mattress, releasing the tension of the day. As your eyes close, a much older world emerges from the shadows of time. We travel back to a quiet, forgotten evening in the early 16th century, where a vast empire is about to be born. The air across the northern plains of India is heavy with the scent of parched earth waiting for the summer monsoons. A lone traveler pauses beside an ancient highway at sunset. He watches the long, protective shadows of giant banyan trees stretch across the flat, baked soil. The intense heat of the afternoon slowly dissipates into the darkening sky. It is easy to picture this vast open landscape turning from a blinding afternoon haze to a perfectly still, blue-hued night. The dust storms of the daytime completely drop, allowing a gentle, cool breeze to ripple across the fields. This calm environment marks a monumental transition in Mughal history. In this peaceful twilight, the Indian subcontinent shifts away from late medieval fragmentation. A centralized imperial dawn begins to rise under the first royal forces. And yet, even amid this macro-level political shift, the quiet rhythm of daily life continues unchanged. In the high, cooling halls of the palace, court scribes prepare for the night ahead. They dip reed pens into ink, mixed with fragrant gum Arabic. The scribes write with a gentle, rhythmic scratch that breaks the quiet of the room. Early court records and imperial decrees, known as farmans, are meticulously composed in classical Persian. This linguistic structure is deliberately balanced to function like poetry, sounding distinctly melodic when read aloud to the assembly. The flowing words soothe the ears of tired listeners under the light of flickering beeswax candles. To keep the interior chambers comfortable, attendants walk slowly along the marble verandas. They splash water from heavy leather skins onto dark green mats woven from the roots of vetiver grass, known locally as hus. As the first stars appear, the warm evening breeze passes through the wet fibers. It fills the living quarters with an earthy, damp scent and a cooling moisture that lowers the temperature of the stone floors. Behind the imperial seating area, attendants carry ceremonial fly whisks, called shoris, crafted from the soft white hair of Tibetan yak tails. They wave the whisks with a slow, deliberate, pendulum-like motion. This rhythmic swing creates a predictable, low-frequency hum through the air. A traveler standing there might have noticed how this constant movement focuses the mind, encouraging a deep sense of relaxation. Outside the fort walls, the night watchmen, or chowkidars, begin their patrols along the ancient brick perimeters. They carry lanterns filled with unrefined sesame oil, which burns with a thick, warm aroma. At regular intervals, their low, reassuring voices call out short phrases into the darkness, letting the sleeping town know that the night is safe. A weary merchant resting inside the city gates hears their soft footfalls fade away into the shadows. Down by the wide, slow-moving riverways, a different ritual unfolds. Local ascetics and travelers light small, unbaked clay lamps called diyas. They fill the little cups with clarified butter and a soft cotton wick. The lamps are placed gently onto broad green leaves and set adrift down the dark current. One can almost imagine watching these tiny, flickering points of golden light glide over the ripples, surviving the gentle swell of the water as they float into the distance. The sky overhead turns a deep indigo color before becoming completely black. Early Persian travelers frequently noted this unique, intense shade in their journals, comparing it to the plant-based indigo dyes produced in the nearby fields of Bayana. A writer stepping out onto a high balcony looks up at this vast expanse, dipping his brush into blue ink that matches the night sky. The empire is resting, wrapped in an absolute, timeless serenity. As the modern world fades away, a much older world emerges from the shadows of time. The physical landscape determines the destiny of all things. To understand the grand scale of the subcontinent, one must first look at the massive mountain walls that guard its northern borders. The high-altitude passes of the Hindu Kush are characterized by a profound, ringing silence. The air here is thin, sharp, and perpetually freezing. The only sound for miles across the rugged peaks is the predictable crunch of horse hooves on ancient shale and frozen meltwater. A merchant caravan pauses at the summit of the Khyber Pass. Looking down through the shifting morning mist, the travelers see the infinite, shimmering horizon of the plains unfolding beneath them like a vast green sea. As the mountain paths descend, the terrain softens into the fertile, alluvial plains of the Indo-Gangetic Basin. This immense cradle of life is sustained by the continuous flow of two great river systems, the Ganges and the Yamuna. The Ganges River carries millions of tons of microscopic, nutrient-rich alluvial clay from the high Himalayas down to the flat valleys. This fine mineral sediment is deposited so gently during the seasonal floods that it forms a soft gray floor across thousands of miles. One can almost imagine a farmer sifting this ultra-fine, cool silt through his fingers after the floodwaters have completely receded, feeling the literal dust of the high mountains beneath his palms. To the west, the Yamuna River glides parallel to the Ganges, possessing a distinctly deeper, clearer blue color. A royal boatman glides along the exact watery border at Prayagraj, where the clear blue current meets the pale, milky white, silt-heavy streams of the sister river. The soft splashing of his oars blends with the rising river mist as the two distinct colors flow side by side before merging into one single, powerful lifeline. On the arid edges of these fertile plains lie the Thar borderlands, where the soil turns to dry, sun-baked earth. Here, local communities dug deep water wells that reached hundreds of feet into the subterranean dark. They utilized pairs of slow-moving oxen to draw up heavy leather buckets. The water, retrieved from these depths, remained ice-cold despite the blistering surface heat. A weary traveler presses a wet stone jug against his forehead, feeling the ancient cold drawn from deep beneath the parched soil, a brief relief from his long journey. The open roads across the flat plains are marked by ancient banyan trees so massive that a single tree creates a permanent, self-contained ecosystem of deep shade. Their thick wooden aerial roots hang down like columns, forming natural rooms that can shelter an entire caravan of merchants and animals. A group of travelers rests in the emerald-tinted twilight beneath the giant canopy, listening to the gentle sound of the wind rustling thousands of thick, leathery leaves. And yet, even amid this immense natural scale, human ingenuity found a harmonious rhythm with the land. The introduction of the Persian water wheel, known locally as the rahat, transformed the agricultural landscape. This device lifted water continuously from deep wells using a chain of clay pots. It created a continuous, musical creaking sound of seasoned wood scraping against wood that could be heard for miles across the flat rural plains at night. A farmer rests his back against the ancient stone well, listening to the predictable, steady splash of water buckets overturning in the dark, a soothing song of abundance that lulls the countryside to sleep. Further east, the marshy plains at the base of the Himalayas, known as the Terai foothills, are covered in dense stands of elephant grass and wild ginger. An ox cart slowly brushes through the tall stalks in the early hours. This deliberate motion releases waves of a sharp, medicinal sweetness into the damp morning fog, clearing the senses of the drivers as they navigate the narrow dirt tracks. The land between the Ganges and the Yamuna rivers, called the Doab, is remarkably flat and unmoving. A traveler standing on a small brick mound can see the white sails of riverboats miles away, gliding silently across fields of tall sugarcane. As the late afternoon sun dips toward the horizon, the distant river transforms into a shimmering silver ribbon cutting through the endless green fields. In the winter months, moisture from the Indus River system settles over the northern fields of the Punjab plains. By midnight, the cold air causes a heavy, silent dew to coat the vegetation. The leaves of the mustard crops drip water as if it had rained for hours. A traveler wraps his heavy wool shawl tighter around his shoulders as he watches the glistening dewdrops catch the brilliant starlight, illuminating a field of bright yellow flowers that stretches into the dark. The scale of that world is astonishing. The birth of a dynasty begins with a memory of a colder home. Before the grand palaces of white marble rose along the riverbanks of Hindustan, the foundations of the empire were carried on horseback through the snowy mountain passes of Central Asia. Into this environment stepped Babur, a young prince displaced from his ancestral valley of Fergana. He carried with him the fierce pride of his Timurid ancestors. Yet his early life was defined by wandering, exile, and the constant search for a permanent sovereign foothold. The physical transition from the crisp, cool air of the north to the unyielding heat of the Indian plains left a profound mark on the hearts of the early conquerors. Central Asian soldiers sat inside their traditional heavy wool yurts, which they insisted on erecting even upon the flat plains of Delhi. These thick, compressed felt structures, designed for the freezing winds of the steppes, trapped the intense summer heat, making the air inside heavy and warm. The men sat in the shadows, sweating in their thick tunics, listening with a sense of deep nostalgia to the unfamiliar evening calls of Indian peacocks echoing through the brush. The emperor himself shared this deep sense of melancholic longing. Babur wrote explicitly in his personal memoirs, the Baburnama, about weeping over the taste of a single musk melon imported via camel caravan from his home in Fergana. He found the hot, rich fruits of India unappealing at first, missing the crisp sweetness of the high valleys. One can almost imagine the ruler sitting inside a warm canvas tent in Agra, carefully slicing a rare, cool melon sent across the mountain passes, remembering the clear, icy childhood streams of the north as the sweet fruit juice cooled his palate. To bring comfort to the royal household, networks of horse-post runners were organized across the Hindu Kush. These riders brought blocks of mountain ice wrapped in thick blankets from the snowy peaks down to the burning plains. A palace cupbearer would carefully unwrap the damp linen bundles to find a clean, dripping shard of mountain ice, dropping it into a metal goblet of sweet rose syrup. The soft clink of ice against metal provided a fleeting taste of winter in a land of permanent summer. And yet, even amid this intense homesickness, the process of adaptation began. Early settlers brought the seeds of Central Asian clover, or lucerne, across the mountains to feed their horses. This minor introduction altered the small-scale botanical makeup of the grazing grounds around Kabul and Delhi. A stable hand let his tired horse graze on a lush patch of this unfamiliar, sweet-smelling purple clover by the riverbank, the sound of the animal chewing grass blending softly with the cool river breeze. The culture of these nomadic princes was deeply rooted in the preservation of knowledge and shared community. While traveling across dangerous mountain passes and fleeing shifting kingdoms, the steppe princes carried portable libraries. These consisted of heavy leather cases filled with hand-painted manuscripts, protecting their books more fiercely than chests of gold. A camp guard checked the dry leather seals of the book chests at night, while the rain fell softly on the mountain trail outside, ensuring the precious parchment remained dry. In the initial years of the conquest, this shared hardship maintained a court of remarkable equality. Following the tradition of the steppes, the ruler sat directly on the same woven carpet as his generals, eating from communal copper platters with no elevated throne. The leader shared a simple meal of roasted lamb and dried apricots with his soldiers, talking softly under a canopy of stars about the battles they had won and the realm they were building. The mechanical recording of this history moved at the same steady pace as the camp. Scribes in the early imperial camp designed specialized, compact wooden lap desks that could be strapped directly to a horse's saddle. This allowed them to dip their pens and record administrative decrees while moving at a slow walk. As a horse paused to drink from a shallow stream, the scribe would write smoothly, the ink drying quickly in the warm, moving breeze. To master the climate, Babur initiated a series of architectural experiments. Finding the local Indian water wells unorganized and exposed to the dust, he ordered the construction of a highly symmetrical stepwell, or baoli, at the Agra fort. Descending the cool stone steps into the deep shaded dark of the subterranean chambers, the ambient sound of the surface world dropped to a soft whisper. It was here, surrounded by cool stone walls and damp shadows, that his family found an absolute sanctuary from the midday sun. The rulers also carried a deep spiritual trust in the natural world. They wore royal signet rings carved from deep moss-green nephrite jade, a stone prized by their ancestors for its supposed power to prevent lightning strikes and bring calmness to the restless heart. The ruler would press his smooth, oil-treated jade ring into soft, warm red wax to seal a decree of peace, his fingers feeling the cool stone against his skin. The small, fragile foothold established by these early campaigns planted a forward-looking loop in the soil of Hindustan. Though Babur's reign was short, his presence laid the groundwork for an empire of unimaginable tolerance and wealth. Before his death, he requested that he be buried not in a grand, heavy mausoleum in India, but in an open-air garden in Kabul, exposed to the sky and the cold mountain winds he missed so dearly. Wind rustles through the wild pomegranate trees above a simple stone grave on that hillside today, overlooking the valley. The memory endured for centuries. At midnight, the political ambitions of the empire dissolve into absolute stillness. The grand timeline of conquests and decrees falls away, leaving only the quiet geometry of the paradise garden. To enter this nocturnal sanctuary is to step onto a stage where human architecture and the natural world exist in perfect, rhythmic alignment. The air is cool, heavy with moisture, and completely isolated from the dust of the open plains. The structural blueprint of the Charbagh is designed to mimic celestial order, dividing the landscape into 4 equal quadrants by stone water channels. These channels represent the 4 rivers of paradise described in ancient cosmological traditions. flowing outward from a central source toward the edge of the world. A visitor sits at the central intersection of these stone pathways, watching the water divide in 4 perfect cardinal directions. The gentle gurgling of the stream blends with the damp, rich smell of wet earth, settling the mind into a steady, meditative state. Walking barefoot along the moonlit marble walkways, the feet encounter the soft, cool texture of freshly fallen blossoms. Gardeners planted rows of parashot, the night-flowering jasmine, along these paths because its small white flowers open exclusively at midnight. By dawn, they drop to the ground to form a fragrant, snowy carpet. The intense floral scent drifts through the open stone pavilions, mixing with the cool night air that rises from the riverbanks. The soundscape of the garden is a deliberate masterpiece of fluid mechanics. The depth and slope of the stone water channels, known as the Nar, were precisely calibrated by imperial engineers to create a soft, liquid purr rather than a loud, distracting splash. This acoustic reduction was specifically engineered to induce relaxation and protect the ears of the court from cognitive fatigue. An emperor lies on a plush silk bolster near the water's edge, his breathing naturally slowing down to match the steady, liquid murmur of the channel moving through the dark. Below the surface of the shallow garden pools, the design shifts to enhance the light of the night sky. The beds of these pools were lined with dark slate tiles instead of white stone. This choice turned the water into a perfect, dark mirror, reflecting the stars and the moon without a single distortion. Looking down into a still basin, one can see the constellation of Orion perfectly framed by the dark stone border. Held stationary within the liquid glass, along the perimeter walls, the architecture interacts gently with fire and water. The stone walls feature small, beautifully carved niches, known as chinicana, located directly behind the sheets of falling water cascades. At night, attendants place small clay oil lamps inside these niches. A guest resting in the pavilion watches the warm golden light of the candles dancing and rippling through the moving curtain of clear water, creating a soft hydraulic hiss that masks the distant noises of the city. The care of these gardens continues through the dark hours. Palace gardeners work rhythmically during the cooler night to prune the citrus and orange trees. This practice prevents the delicate wood from splitting under the midday sun, while the crisp snip of their brass shears releases essential oils from the leaves into the air. This sharp, fresh citrus aroma drifts through the marble columns, brightening the heavy sweetness of the jasmine. Above the marble platforms, massive tents made of pale blue and white silk are stretched to form garden pavilions. These light fabrics catch the steady midnight breeze, billowing gently to soften the rigid lines of the sandstone walls. A resting noble listens to the rhythmic, low, snapping sound of the silk canopy moving under the wind, a soothing bass line that reinforces the security of the space. In the high, slender branches of the cypress trees, the flamboyant birds of the daytime court have gone to rest. The peacocks climb into the dark foliage at dusk, tucking their long emerald tails away and falling into total, motionless silence. A night watchman looks up to see their dark silhouettes perched perfectly still against the deep blue night sky, a testament to the absolute avian peace that settles over the grounds. To further elevate the sensory environment, attendants rub rich, warm sandalwood paste onto the smooth stone sluice gates where water enters the living quarters. As the current rushes over the scented wood, it absorbs the warm, woody aroma, carrying it directly into the bedchambers of the princesses. The water becomes a vessel for fragrance, soothing the residents as they drift toward sleep. The paths are illuminated by thick, hand-blown green glass bowls filled with water and a top layer of scented mustard oil. Each bowl holds a single floating wick that burns with a soft, steady, warm emerald light. A servant uses a long reed to gently trim the wick of a floating lamp, making the green glow steady and calm once more. When the entry channels are closed at midnight, the large central pool of the Sharbog becomes completely motionless. A single drop of condensation falls from a marble balustrade above, creating a single concentric circle that slowly travels across the perfect reflection of the moon. The mystery still remains. The true strength of an empire rests not in the high stone walls of its fortresses, but in the quiet, daily routines of the people who cultivate its soil and weave its fabrics. To understand the social fabric of Hindustan, one must look away from complex bureaucratic flowcharts and zoom in on the small, interconnected communities that formed the backbone of rural life. Across the vast northern plains, the changing seasons and the movements of the stars dictated a steady communal rhythm that sustained millions. Peasant farmers, known as ryots, managed their demanding lives by a clock built into the sky rather than through mechanical devices. During the scorching summer months, they conducted their vital irrigation shifts entirely during the cool hours of midnight. To track their time, they watched the position of the Pleiades star cluster, which they called Kritika, as it tracked slowly across the dark heavens. A farmer leans heavily on his simple wooden spade in the middle of a cool mud field, looking up at the glittering constellation to know exactly when to open his small earthen canal gate. The soft squelch of wet soil around his bare feet and the cool night air provide a quiet sanctuary from the memories of the day's heat. In the nearby manufacturing villages, a different kind of nocturnal dedication shaped the economy. The finest, most valuable cotton muslin, known across the world as shabnam or evening dew, was woven exclusively in the damp hours before dawn. The high atmospheric humidity of these early hours was a structural necessity. It prevented the incredibly fine, spiderweb thin threads from snapping on the loom. A weaver works in the pale blue light of dawn, his hands moving with a blind, fluid memory over threads that are nearly invisible in the morning shadows. The rhythmic, steady click of his wooden loom provides a gentle acoustic backdrop to the awakening countryside. The governance of these communities was felt through tangible, heavy materials. Regional landowners, known as zamindars, walked through the village markets at dusk carrying immense rings of heavy, unpolished brass keys. These keys secured the large community grain stores, ensuring the survival of the village through dry seasons. As the zamindar walks, the deep metallic clank of the keys echoes across the emptying squares. He stops to lock the heavy teak doors of a granary at sunset, the solid, muffled click of the iron bolts signaling to the community that their resources are secure for the night. At the outermost edges of the towns, other artisans worked through the dark to protect the daily comfort of residential areas. Tallow makers, who rendered fat to manufacture the candles that illuminated the courts, operated exclusively during the middle of the night. This strict schedule kept the strong, heavy smell of rendering fat away from the busy daytime markets. A lone candle maker watches his large copper cauldron bubble under the stars, his tired face illuminated by the soft, warm, orange glow of a small wood fire. Into this environment stepped the grand administrative updates of the central state. yet they were always translated into human tools. To standardize land taxation fairly across thousands of villages, Akbar's officials utilized specialized measuring rods made of seasoned bamboo joined together by solid iron rings. These rods were meticulously inlaid with smooth pieces of river shell that gleamed in low light. An official lays down the polished bamboo rod across dry agricultural furrows in the early morning, the mother of pearl markers catching the first golden sunbeams to ensure a precise, peaceful measurement of the harvest. When the emperor traveled through these provinces, the court transformed into a massive canvas city of over 100,000 people. This moving capital was laid out in a perfectly identical geometric grid every single night, ensuring that the structural layout remained completely predictable. A weary horseman arriving at midnight could find his way easily through unfamiliar territory because the straight lines of the white tents and the geometric placement of the ropes mirrored his hometown layout precisely. He rides past the quiet, low crackle of distant campfires, guided safely to his quarters. Along the open highways, individuals of completely different social castes and regional backgrounds found common ground inside the roadside serais. They sat together at night around small fires, sharing a simple, grounding meal of unleavened bread and coarse pink rock salt. This simple gesture of dipping bread into a small terracotta bowl of salt slurry guaranteed mutual protection under the unspoken, sacred law of hospitality. They conversed in low murmurs, their differences softened by the glowing embers of the fire. The preservation of water was another vital social role, managed through the humble work of the village potters. They threw heavy, porous red clay jars called matkas, which allowed water to slowly seep through the walls and evaporate, keeping the liquid inside ice cold for field workers. A tired harvester lifts the heavy clay jar to his lips at the end of a long day, feeling the clean, wet, earthy aroma of the moist clay hitting his throat, cooling his body from the inside out. The records of these lands were kept with equal softness. Village accountants, known as patwaris, recorded land boundaries and generations of family holdings using long scrolls of soft cotton cloth instead of brittle paper. These fabric maps could be unrolled and rolled up completely silently, and they were entirely immune to the tearing or rotting caused by intense monsoon humidity. An old scribe sits cross-legged on a woven mat, smoothly flattening a soft indigo-dyed cloth map that outlines a family's ancestral wheat fields. As the night deepens, the washermen, or dhobies, begin their demanding work along the misty riverbanks. They use the cool night water to wash the city's linens so they can be dried flat under the clean, dust-free morning sun. The rhythmic, distant sound of wet linen hitting smooth river stones echoes through the pre-dawn air, keeping a steady time for the sleeping town nearby. Meanwhile, the massive white Gujarat oxen that pulled the royal carriages are grazed exclusively in dark meadows, letting them eat fresh grass when it is coated in cool, hydrating dew. A young herder lies on his back in the dark grass, listening to the peaceful, soft crunching of the vegetation by the large, gentle animals. At the center of the resting village, the large watch drum is rubbed with protective mustard oil and covered with a heavy wool blanket to rest for the night. The scale of that world is astonishing. Sovereign power in Hindustan was not merely a matter of military dominance. It was framed as a manifestation of divine light and cosmic order. The early Mughal rulers cultivated an aura of golden, opulent majesty that moved at a slow, deliberate pace, designed to project absolute stability to the millions living beneath their shadow. Leadership was expressed through meticulous daily rituals, symbolic garments, and administrative systems that transformed the chaotic energy of the realm into a predictable, harmonious hierarchy. The alignment of governance with the universe began with the highly structured daily protocols of Emperor Humayun. He organized his court's operations to match the positions of the planets, choosing the colors of his clothing based on the celestial bodies that ruled each morning. He wore bright yellow silk on Wednesdays, the day of Mercury, and rich emerald green on Mondays, the day of the moon, to channel cosmic harmony into his decrees. A traveler standing in the palace at dawn might watch the ruler stand before his heavy wooden wardrobe, selecting a thick, rustling robe of green silk to match the gentle, cooling energy of the morning moon. This visual connection between the ruler and his people was expanded by his son, Akbar, through the daily ritual of the Jaroka Darshan. Every single morning, precisely as the sun broke over the eastern horizon, the emperor appeared at a small, intricately carved balcony built into the high fort walls. This practice allowed the public to see their sovereign directly, without any intervening courtiers or bureaucratic barriers. A peasant stands in the cool morning mist below the high sandstone ramparts, watching a single wooden shutter slide open smoothly to reveal the quiet, golden backlit silhouette of the emperor against the morning sky, creating a powerful sense of direct, personal reassurance. Inside the grand public audience hall, known as the Diwan-e-Am, this majesty was reinforced through texture and sensory immersion. The hall contained no chairs. Instead, every nobleman, ambassador, and petitioner stood or sat on a single, massive hand-knotted woolen carpet that stretched from wall to wall. This dense, soft pile enforced a quiet, soft-footed movement throughout the assembly, muffling the footsteps of hundreds into a gentle hush. A nobleman glides silently across the intricate floral patterns of the wool, his soft leather slippers leaving temporary indentations in the dense pile as he approaches the elevated platform. To maintain an atmosphere of deep focus and prestige, the throne room was continuously filled with a heavy, sweet fog of a state-regulated incense known as ode. This luxury blend combined crushed ambergris, aloe wood, pure sandalwood paste, and patchouli oil. A foreign ambassador steps through the heavy crimson velvet curtains of the hall, his initial anxiety dissolving as a dense wave of warm, intoxicatingly sweet sandalwood smoke washes over him, framing the seated emperor in a surreal golden haze. Flanking the magnificent peacock throne, attendants held massive fly whisks crafted from thousands of strands of raw, unspun white silk. These fibers were carefully selected to catch the interior light, shimmering like falling water with every movement. The attendants waved these whisks in a slow, alternate, continuous motion, creating a hypnotic pattern of silver light behind the ruler's head that calmed the crowded hall and maintained a steady, low-frequency air current. The administrative genius that sustained this authority was recorded in the records of the Mansabdari system, the ledger books detailing every official's rank, livestock obligations, and land grants were bound in deep crimson velvet. These heavy volumes were stored in a secure archive room, lined entirely with polished cedar wood, which left a permanent, clean aroma in the air while protecting the precious ink from the destructive moisture and insects of the plains. A clerk quietly turns a heavy, stiff page of velvet, the dry scratch of his quill amplified by the absolute silence of the cedar-lined treasury. When an official performed his duties with exceptional merit, the emperor bestowed a sovereign gift known as the kilat. This was a luxurious silk robe that the emperor had physically worn himself for at least an hour, a gesture meant to transfer his royal presence and fragrance directly to the recipient. A provincial governor receives the folded silk garment with both hands, lifting it to his face to smell the faint, comforting trace of royal ambergris and sandalwood ink that lingers within the threads, a tangible bond of loyalty. The passage of hours within this majestic world was regulated by an intricate water clock, the Garia. Every hour, the mechanism dropped a small brass ball into a heavy copper bowl with a deep resonance, signaling a servant to strike a soft bronze gong using a mallet wrapped in thick, dense wool. A courtier working late into the evening hears this rich, muffled chime vibrate gently through the sandstone floors, marking the passage of time without startling the quiet palace. As the sun sets, the daytime guards parade before the empty throne. They lay down their long silver staffs silently on a velvet bench, bowing once toward the seat of power before handing over the watch to the night shift. The faint metallic ring of the silver rods being aligned on a cushion is followed by the soft rustle of silk capes as the daytime guards depart into the evening air. Akbar spent these final hours of the day in his dark marble bedchamber, listening to an old blind courtier read history and philosophy aloud from a small gallery positioned above his bed, finding comfort in the tales of ancient kings as the candles flickered against the stone walls. Their influence survived long after they disappeared. The wealth of an empire is measured not in hoards, but in the safe footsteps of its travelers. Beyond the high court and the stone architecture of the cities, the true lifeblood of Hindustan flowed along its vast highway networks. The most prominent of these veins was the Grand Trunk Road, an endless ribbon of packed earth and stone that connected the distant provinces. Along this path, a continuous hypnotic rhythm of travel sustained the economy, moving goods, languages, and cultures across the subcontinent without the need for frantic speed. During the intense heat of the summer months, the massive camel caravans that transported the empire's wealth traveled predominantly during the cool hours of the night. Their wide, fleshy hoof pads made virtually no sound as they trod through the thick, soft dust of the highway. A villager living by the roadside looks out his window at midnight, seeing a long, silent line of massive camel silhouettes passing like ghosts in the dark. The only sound is the gentle rustle of heavy packs filled with fine silks and raw spices, moving steadily under the starlight. Among the most valuable cargoes carried along this road were the square cakes of plant-based indigo dye, cultivated in the fertile fields of Bayana. After harvest, the deep blue dye was compressed into small bricks and stored inside vast dark clay drying sheds. The internal air of these structures was entirely cool and saturated with a rich, comforting, earthy scent that smelled like rain hitting warm stone. A merchant checks the dry crust of an indigo brick before packing it into a wooden crate, his fingers tipped with a permanent stain of deep midnight blue that marks his trade. The transactions that fueled this commerce were conducted with the standardized rupiah, a coin minted from nearly pure silver. Because the metal was so heavy and soft, the coins made a dull, soft clink rather than a sharp, jarring ring when dropped into a money pouch. A market trader runs his thumb over the smooth, raised Persian calligraphy of a fresh silver coin by the low, steady light of a sesame lamp, verifying its weight and value in the quiet of his shop as the evening market closes. To shelter these merchants on their long journeys, the state constructed brick-carved caravanserais every 15 miles along the imperial highways. These roadside inns featured deep brick archways and thick-walled interior courtyards designed to trap the cool night air and exclude the heavy road dust. Stepping off the parched highway at dusk, a traveler enters a high-walled courtyard where the air feels 10 degrees cooler and smells cleanly of fresh well water. He can unroll his mat in a shaded alcove, safe from the elements. The precious spices from the south, such as Malabar pepper and cinnamon bark, were transported in heavy teak chests, sealed with a specialized mixture of raw beeswax and crushed pine resin. This treatment ensured the contents remained entirely airtight and waterproof during the long, humid transit. A customs official breaks one of these dark red wax seals at a regional checkpoint, releasing a sudden, intense burst of warm cinnamon aroma into the cool evening air, a fragrant reminder of the distant lands that fed the empire's markets. The communication network that linked these checkpoints relied on the dak chowki, a system of royal mail messengers. These riders operated on horses fitted with small, single-toned copper bells that had a low melodic chime. The gentle sound was designed to alert the next station keeper to prepare a fresh horse without waking the sleeping countryside. A station keeper hears the faint single brass chime drift through the dark forest miles away, calmly lighting his lantern to ready a fresh mount in the pre-dawn quiet. The delicate work of inspection and weighing also moved into the calm hours of midnight. The balance masters weighed raw silk hanks in the middle of the night to ensure their sensitive brass scales were not disturbed by a single afternoon breeze. A master watches a tiny bronze pointer come to an absolute rest as a soft skein of golden silk lies perfectly stationary on the brass pan, recording the weight in his ledger by candlelight. The highways themselves were designed to protect those who moved the wealth of the realm. They were systematically planted on both sides with ancient neem and tamarind trees, creating an endless, dark green tunnel of dense shade during the afternoon heat. As the evening sky turns to a gentle violet color, the leaves keep the road surface damp with evening mist, filling the air with a fresh, bitter-sweet botanical fragrance that cools the skin of passing walkers. Water on these long routes was provided by the bistis, water carriers who walked the caravan lines with large bags made of hand-tanned goatskin called a mashk. These leather containers naturally cooled the water inside through continuous, subtle surface evaporation through the fine pores of the skin. A thirsty traveler receives a thin stream of water from the dark leather bag, noticing the clean, wet, earthy smell of the moist skin before the cool liquid hits his parched throat. Even the luxury goods of the Far East found a safe path along these roads. Exotic Chinese blue and white porcelain destined for the royal kitchens was packed into heavy teak crates filled with soft, dry rice straw that had been washed repeatedly to remove all coarse grit. An unpacking servant gently pulls away the layers of golden straw to reveal a flawless, cool porcelain bowl reflecting the lantern light, untouched by the thousands of miles of travel. One can almost imagine the quiet satisfaction of the merchant as he sees his fragile cargo arrive without a single flaw. The empire was built not only upon the shifting sands of politics, but upon the patient, rhythmic labor of its craftsmen. To walk into an imperial workshop, or kitabkhana, is to enter a world where time itself seems to slow down. The frantic pace of the outside world vanishes, replaced by the steady, focused scratching of reed pens and the quiet scraping of lapidary tools. The air in these halls carries a distinct, lingering scent, a heavy, comforting mixture of drying gum arabic, crushed mineral pigments, and the faint, sweet smell of acacia wood burning in the kilns nearby. The alchemy of stone was not merely a trade, it was a meditation. In the specialized workshops dedicated to pietra dura, or parchin kari, the work revolved around the delicate art of stone inlay. Craftsmen sat on low wooden stools for hours, perfectly still in their focus. They used a simple wooden bowstring coated with fine emery dust to slice semi-precious stones like lapis lazuli, jasper, and carnelian into tiny, precise petal shapes. The sound was a steady, rhythmic, and rasping scrape that repeated for hours, a sound so hypnotic that it seemed to anchor the very walls of the palace. The craftsman would slide the bow back and forth, slowly grinding through the hard stone until the petal was perfect. It was a process that demanded not just time, but a deep, quiet surrender to the material. The precision of this work was mirrored in the nearby painting studios. Here, the miniature painters worked with a singular, quiet intensity. They mixed their powdered mineral pigments such as ground malachite, lapis, and rare gold leaf with the sap of the local acacia tree, known as gum arabic. This binder carried a faint, nostalgic smell of honey that permeated the room. A painter would dip a single hair squirrel brush into a small clamshell cup of the gold-tinted sap. He would execute a fine line thinner than a human hair, his breath held steady, his hand moving with a blind memory developed over decades. It was a fragile, exacting labor that turned raw, dusty minerals into vivid, eternal images. Beyond the paint and the stone, the empire demanded a foundation of perfect surfaces. To achieve the mirror-like finish on the white Makrana marble that defined the imperial monuments, workers spent weeks rubbing the stone walls with nothing but bundles of soft, wet rice straw mixed with fine white agate dust. A young apprentice would move his hands in massive, circular patterns across a smooth white wall. He would feel the stone transition under his palms, shifting from a rough, cool shale texture to a surface that felt as smooth as polished glass. It was a transformative act, where the raw mountain rock was disciplined into something refined, bright, and enduring. The interior walls of these palaces were just as meticulously crafted as the exterior. They were coated in chunam, a plaster made from burnt river shells mixed with unrefined sugar juice known as jaggery, and egg whites. This recipe created a surface as smooth and white as ivory. A resident might run a hand over an interior bedroom wall and find it cool to the touch, feeling like polished porcelain. When the air grew humid in the evenings, the walls would release a faint, sweet aroma from the jaggery, a subtle, sensory reminder of the craftsmanship that kept the interior air pure and temperate. The paper that carried the empire's history was equally deliberate in its manufacture. The premium writing paper was produced in the city of Sialkot, where linen rags were beaten by water-powered stone mallets into a fine pulp. This pulp was lifted onto reed screens to dry under clean linen sheets. A papermaker would peel away a fresh, damp sheet of pale cream paper from a reed mold. He would feel its unique, fiber-rich texture between his fingers, knowing that this single sheet would carry the weight of a royal decree for centuries to come. Even the tools of music were refined by this dedication to material perfection. Makers of musical instruments utilized iridescent mother of pearl harvested from freshwater mussels found in the Yamuna River to line the necks of their sitars. This allowed musicians to find their frets by touch, even in the dark, candlelit rooms of the evening. A court musician would slide his fingers along a dark teak wood neck, his thumb instantly recognizing the cool, slightly raised circle of a shell marker. The instrument was not just a tool for sound, it was a physical extension of the craftsman's intimacy with the world. The creation of the brilliant royal blue ink used by these scribes was another act of profound patience. The scribes prepared the ink by manually grinding pure Afghan lapis lazuli stone on an agate slab for 3 full days. They would grind until the powder was so fine it would float on the surface of water like dust, before finally adding the gum tree sap. The quiet, circular scraping sound of the agate pestle grinding stone into dust echoed hour after hour in the quiet corner of the library. It was the sound of concentrated time, measured in the transformation of rock into fluid color. The raw materials for the empire's structural needs were prepared with equal care. Timber selected for the emperor's pleasure boats was seasoned by burying it completely in deep, dry river sandbars for 2 full years. This slow, steady extraction process removed all internal moisture without cracking the grain of the wood. When shipwrights finally unearthed a giant log of teak from a dry sandbar, they found it perfectly light, dry, and smelling of rich, preserved wood oil. It was ready to be shaped into a vessel that would glide silently down the Yamuna. Even the glassmakers worked in rhythm with the cooling earth. Artisans creating small, delicate perfume vials and glass beads allowed their brick kilns to cool down exclusively during the middle of the night. This schedule matched the natural drop in ambient temperature to prevent the hot glass from cracking during the setting process. A glassmaker would sit outside his cooling brick kiln, watching the internal orange light fade behind the clay bricks while the night air turned crisp and still. The alchemy of stone was not just a science, but a meditation on the permanence of human effort. These workshops were the silent, pulsing heart of the empire, where the raw elements of the earth, stone, pigment, wood, and water were tempered into forms of lasting beauty. The atmosphere in these studios was one of absolute dedication, where the only urgency was the requirement of perfection. The memory of their steady hands, their calm focus, and their deep knowledge of materials survived long after the workshops themselves fell silent. One can almost imagine the calm, dusty air of those rooms, the way the light fell across the stone slabs, and the quiet satisfaction of a task completed with total devotion. The scale of that world is astonishing. To understand the inner peace that sustained the empire through its long history, one must look away from the material wealth of the treasury and step into the quiet, sacred spaces of spiritual devotion. Across Hindustan, a deep undercurrent of Sufi mysticism and Bhakti saint movements formed a divine loom, weaving together different traditions into a tapestry of peaceful coexistence. The spiritual life of the realm was anchored not by rigid doctrines, but by physical spaces that invited contemplation and a shared search for universal truth. In the heart of the sandstone city of Fatehpur Sikri stands the tomb of the Sufi saint Salim Chishti, constructed entirely of pure white marble. The structure features intricate, pierced stone lattice screens called jalis, which break the harsh, blinding sunlight of the plains into tiny, geometric, cool shadows that dance across the floor. A pilgrim approaches the tomb with slow, measured steps, tying a red cotton thread to the marble screen, while his face is brushed by a cool breeze that smells faintly of old rosewater. The absolute stillness of the courtyard encourages a deep, quiet surrender to the moment, letting the outside world fade away into silence. This spirit of intellectual and spiritual exploration was championed by the court itself. At his house of worship, the Ibadat Khana, Akbar gathered theologians from Jesuit, Hindu, Muslim, Zoroastrian, and Jain traditions to debate philosophy late into the night. The assembly frequently sat in total silence for hours, reflecting deeply on the arguments presented before offering a response. A scholar points out a line of an ancient manuscript text by the soft, warm light of a flickering torch, while a priest listens intently, nodding slowly in the quiet, shadowed room. The atmosphere was one of profound mutual respect, where the pursuit of truth was conducted with a gentle, unhurried focus. Along the open, dusty roads of the provinces, street saints of the Bhakti movement carried this message of inner peace directly to the common people. They walked from village to village carrying simple, single-stringed lutes known as ektaras, crafted from a dried desert gourd and a piece of hollow bamboo. An old mystic sits under a village neem tree at dusk, plucking his single string once. The low, resonant note vibrates long into the warm night air, anchoring the minds of the gathering villagers and easing the anxieties of their manual labor. The imperial court held an equally deep respect for the silent walks of the Jain monks who traveled the highway systems. Moving in absolute verbal silence, these monks swept the road dirt before them with a soft brush of feathers to avoid stepping on tiny insects, practicing an unyielding devotion to non-violence. A royal horseman slows his mount to a gentle walk, pulling over to allow a silent monk to pass safely along the shaded edge of the highway. Quiet moment of harmony between temporal power and spiritual discipline. This synthesis of spiritual traditions was further advanced by the royal family itself. Prince Darashikoh spent his nights translating ancient Sanskrit spiritual texts, the Upanishads, into classical Persian, working late into the night with traditional Brahmin scholars to find linguistic bridges between monotheistic Sufism and Hindu mysticism. The prince blows fine sand over a freshly dried page of elegant Persian script that translates the ancient secrets of the soul. Working by an open window that overlooks the dark, silent river loop, the physical comfort of those who prayed was managed with equal care and detail. Royal prayer rugs were lined with a thick layer of carded sheep's wool, placed carefully beneath the delicate silk pile. This ensured that when a person knelt to pray in the dead of night, his knees encountered plush warmth instead of the biting cold of the marble floor. A nobleman steps out of his bed at midnight, his bare feet sinking into the absolute plush warmth of the wool-lined mat, feeling a sense of deep grounding before he begins his quiet devotion. Nature and spiritual ritual existed in a state of constant, rhythmic alignment across the realm. The morning call to prayer, the azan, from the palace mosques was timed not by a mechanical device, but by the first faint stirring of the local black drongo birds. A muezzin stands on a high sandstone balcony, waiting patiently in the cool pre-dawn air for a single black bird to chirp before lifting his hands to his ears to begin his chant. His human voice rises in the quiet air, harmonizing perfectly with the awakening natural world. For ordinary people, visiting the Sufi shrines was a way to release the burdens of daily life. Pilgrims left a tied cotton string on the outer stone lattices of the tombs, making a silent wish for personal peace. when their prayers were answered and their hearts were at ease, they traveled back across the miles to untie a single random knot as a gesture of gratitude. An old woman gently unties a weathered blue cotton thread from a cool marble screen, her heart finally at rest as the knot slips free under her fingers. This philosophy of harmony was formalized as state policy under the legal doctrine of soli kul, translating to universal peace or absolute tolerance. This doctrine prohibited the state from favoring any single religion, ensuring equal protection for all domestic beliefs under the emperor's shadow. A local magistrate reads the royal decree in a quiet town square, his words carrying a sense of permanent security into the calm afternoon air. The memory endured for centuries. But beneath the documented decrees of the ministers, a quieter world of omens guided the empire's destiny. To walk the shadowed corridors of the palace after the formal assemblies have dispersed is to enter a world of whispered secrets, celestial tracking, and enchanting court legends. The absolute authority of the throne was frequently balanced by a deep, quiet reverence for the unseen forces of nature, where the movements of the stars and the resonance of the human voice were believed to alter the physical fabric of the realm. The power of sound was central to the mystique of the imperial inner circle. Court legend claims that the master musician Tansen possessed such absolute control over vocal frequency that he could ignite the palace oil lamps simply by singing Raga Deepak. Courtiers would sit in a dark, humid hall at twilight, their breathing suspended in anticipation as Tansen began his long, resonant vocal notes. As his voice reached a precise high frequency, the cotton wicks of the central brass chandeliers would spontaneously flicker, spark, and bloom into golden flames. The sudden, silent ignition of the lamps filled the room with a warm glow, leaving the audience in a state of quiet wonder. This deep sensitivity to cosmic events was shared by the emperors themselves. In the winter of 1618, Emperor Jahangir recorded the rare appearance of two bright comets in the night sky. While traditional scholars feared these celestial signs, the emperor interpreted them calmly as a heavenly promise that his reign would be blessed with an abundance of soft winter rain to feed the crops. Jahangir leaned out of his bedroom window with a cold brass telescope, carefully sketching the long, glowing silver tails of the two stars in his private diary, his mind at peace with the universe. The architecture of the strongholds was engineered to preserve these intimate courtly dynamics. Inside the massive Agra fort, hidden underground brick tunnels were designed with unique structural curves built directly into the masonry. These specialized acoustic pathways allowed whispers spoken at one end of a corridor to travel clearly to the other side without being overheard by guards standing in between. A princess leans her ear against the cold, smooth brickwork, hearing the distinct, dry whisper of a confidant miles deep inside the fort complex, the secrets of the state moving silently through the very bones of the building. The wealth of the treasury was also wrapped in delicate, mythical lore. A popular palace myth claimed that inside the secure imperial vaults lived a rare species of white spider that wove its webs out of crushed pearl dust rather than traditional silk. These glittering silver webs were said to shimmer like starlight across the dark wooden chests of emeralds and rubies, protecting the crown jewels from the settling road dust. A treasury guard lifting a heavy wooden lid would pause in respect, watching the fragile, luminescent threads glow under his lantern light. The women of the court were equally celebrated for their mastery of hidden sciences and arts, It was rumored among the palace chefs that Empress Nur Jahan possessed a secret recipe for rosewater ice that remained completely solid for hours, even when placed on a silver tray in direct sunlight. This culinary magic relied on a rare, hidden root syrup harvested from the high valleys of Kashmir. A courtier would marvel at a small pink cube of ice sitting stationary on a chased silver tray, remaining cold and perfect while the afternoon air sweltered around the veranda. This scholarly focus extended to the tracking of the planets by the royal princesses. Princess Jahanara kept a private astronomical journal where she meticulously mapped the evening movements of the planet Venus. She believed that when Venus aligned perfectly with the constellation of Libra, it marked a night of ultimate cosmic balance, the ideal time to write poetry about peace. Jahanara would blot a line of verse by her open arched window, looking out at the bright, steady white point of the planet hanging low over the dark garden trees. The emperors also sought personal tranquility through objects of natural perfection. Shah Jahan was rumored to own an immense, flat slice of pure emerald, polished so flawlessly that it functioned as a smooth pocket mirror. Looking into its deep green depths was said to instantly soothe and cure eyes that were tired from hours of reading state documents. The emperor would lift the cool green stone to his face, his vision bathed in a serene oceanic light that calmed his mind before he rested. When faced with massive administrative crises, the rulers often turned to silence to clear their thoughts. Akbar kept a completely blank scroll of fine Sialkot paper inside a polished golden tube on his desk. Instead of consulting his advisors immediately, he would unroll the crisp, white, undisturbed sheet of handmade paper and stare at its empty surface for an hour. Watching the soft torchlight flicker against the blank white page allowed his mind to settle, finding the clarity needed to rule a vast empire in the blank canvas before him. As the night deepens, the attendants in the imperial harems place small green crickets inside tiny cages carved from hollowed-out ivory beads. The court believed that the steady, rhythmic chirping of these insects kept bad dreams away from sleeping infants. A nurse hangs one of these delicate ivory cages near a silken cradle. The cricket's song instantly soothing a restless infant into a deep sleep. Into this environment stepped the quiet peace of the night. The mystery still remains. The protection of a vast realm requires an unhurried strategic mastery that values containment and endurance over chaotic action. Imperial expansion under the dynasty was conducted not with sudden, jarring aggression, but with the steady, massive weight of a deliberate machine. Conflict was treated as a cold science of logistics and geography, where the ultimate objective was a peaceful transition of territory that left the agricultural wealth of the provinces completely intact. The physical reality of this defensive strength was felt through the massive materials of the imperial hosts. The great war elephants that moved at the front of the columns wore immense protective suits crafted from heavy iron plates linked together by thousands of tiny metal rings. To protect the animals from injury during long journeys through the dust, these heavy iron structures were lined on the inside with thick layers of quilted velvet. A stable master runs his hand beneath a heavy iron flap before the column moves out into the evening air, verifying that the soft velvet lining is smooth, dry, and free of grit, feeling the warmth of the elephant's skin beneath the dense cloth. This preference for patient containment over destruction was illustrated by the historic acquisition of Gwalior Fort. Rather than a violent assault, The strategic stronghold was secured through a months-long, quiet blockade that gradually exhausted the defense without ruining the architecture. The conflict concluded with a peaceful negotiation over a tray of sweet melons on a neutral hillside. Two opposing commanders sat at a simple wooden table in the afternoon sun, calmly slicing the fruit while discussing the honorable terms of surrender. The defending garrison marched out entirely unharmed, their banners folded, while the countryside remained undisturbed. The visual presence of the army on the march served a practical environmental purpose. The imperial standards, known as alams, were crafted from exceptionally wide sheets of heavy, gold-embroidered green silk. They were designed to be so broad that when the host moved across the plains, the slow waving of the heavy banners naturally caught and suppressed the rising dust clouds, preventing the air from becoming unbreathable for the foot soldiers. A lone soldier looks up from the line to watch a massive green standard wave slowly in the heavy afternoon air, its gold threads shimmering through a fine veil of settling gray sand. The maintenance of the archer's equipment required an equal dedication to chemistry and patience. The silk bowstrings utilized by the imperial marksmen were systematically soaked in a specialized mixture of liquid camphor and linseed oil. This precise treatment kept the threads incredibly flexible and prevented the rot that could be caused by intense monsoon humidity. A soldier sits comfortably under a canvas tent during a rainstorm, slowly rubbing an oiled cloth along his taut silk string. The pungent, clean scent of the camphor clears his senses while the steady rain beats against the canvas roof outside. Security at the permanent strongholds moved with the quiet fluidity of the rivers. The wide, deep moat surrounding the Red Fort in Delhi was continuously filled with clean water drawn from the adjacent Yamuna River. At nightfall, guards placed small wooden rafts holding single clay oil lamps adrift on the surface to illuminate the dark sandstone base of the walls. A sentry looking down from a high sandstone parapet watches 50 small circles of warm, golden light glide gently across the dark current below, a silent, floating network of vigilance. The pacing of these movements was governed by the strategy of the slow march. Imperial military doctrine prioritized a deliberate, predictable pace that rarely exceeded 10 miles a day. This restriction ensured that the extensive baggage trains and supply livestock never overheated under the sun. A traveler looking down from a nearby hill watches a 3-mile-long column of silken standards and slow ox carts, moving like a gentle, unhurried river through the green sugarcane plains, its steady rhythm reinforcing the permanence of the empire. When a regional fortress surrendered peacefully, the incoming governor initiated a symbolic cleansing of the architectural space. Servants threw hundreds of gallons of pure water mixed with aromatic rose oil across the stone floors of the main audience halls. The intense floral scent rose quickly to fill the hot wooden rafters, washing away the stagnant air of the blockade and preparing the halls for a new era of governance. At night, the outer perimeter of the traveling army camp was marked by a continuous line of low-burning hemp ropes laid directly along the ground. These ropes smoldered slowly through the dark hours, releasing a thin ribbon of blue smoke that naturally repelled insects and snakes from entering the tents. A sentry steps over the thin line of glowing red fiber, watching the smoke drift lazily into the dark grass around the sleeping encampment. And yet, even amid this readiness, life continued in total quiet. The scale of that world is astonishing. The shape of an empire is written in the permanent contours of its stone. While generals mapped the borders of Hindustan on scrolls of cloth, a different group of masters redefined the visual landscape of the realm through a devotion to perfect symmetry and geometric balance. These were the architects, queens, and kings who transformed personal devotion, grief, and political mastery into physical monuments of white marble and red sandstone, creating structural sanctuaries that still catch the starlight centuries after their creators have returned to dust. The pursuit of absolute refinement in design was often driven by the brilliant minds of the imperial women. Empress Nur Jahan permanently altered the sensory aesthetic of the court through her discovery of the ultra-concentrated essential oil of roses, known across the world as ittar. She first noticed this substance while observing a fine, oily film that had naturally formed on the surface of the garden water pools after hundreds of loose rose petals had baked under the intense afternoon sun. The Empress carefully skimmed a single, microscopic droplet of this green oil from the marble pool using a small silver spoon, realizing that its pure, unadulterated fragrance could last for years if sealed in glass. This concentrated essence became the literal signature of her court, filling the open verandas with a scent that defied the dry winds of the plains. This delicate eye for detail was matched by her architectural ambition. For the construction of the tomb of her father, Itmad-ud-Dawla, Nur Jahan personally supervised the selection of rare materials to be inlaid into the crisp white stone. She chose fragments of ancient orange coral imported from the Red Sea to be set directly into the marble panels, intentionally mimicking the exact soft coloration of a desert sunset. The Empress would hold a small, smooth branch of this red coral against a white stone slab, watching the colors balance under the evening light, ensuring that the final monument would capture the fleeting beauty of twilight for eternity. This obsession with structural perfection reached its absolute zenith under Emperor Shah Jahan, who fundamentally rejected the use of local yellow sandstone in his signature monuments. He declared that only the pure white marble from the distant quarries of Makrana and the deep red sandstone of Agra possessed the correct emotional weight to honor the state. When an architect presented a block of the pale yellow stone, the king turned it away with a brief wave of his hand, pointing instead toward a white marble block that gleamed like salt in the open air. To realize his grandest vision, the Taj Mahal, built as a monument of eternal devotion to his late queen, Mumtaz Mahal imperial engineers had to conquer the shifting, soft terrain of the Yamuna riverbank to support the immense weight of the structure without risking a collapse. They dug dozens of deep masonry wells down into the water table, filling them entirely with massive trunks of solid ebony wood. This rare timber possesses a unique structural property. It hardens rather than rots when completely submerged in water. A master builder descends into the dark, damp foundation pit where these massive ebony logs sit locked in the cool river mud, silent, indestructible, and holding the weight of history on their shoulders. The precision of this engineering extended to the very angles of the monument's exterior. The 4 tall minarets that flank the central tomb were deliberately engineered to lean outward by a tiny fraction of a single degree. This fractional tilt ensured that if a massive earthquake ever occurred, the columns would fall safely away from the central dome, protecting the main burial chamber from destruction. An architect plumbs his weighted lead line against the smooth marble column in the cool morning air, verifying that it hangs just a hair's breadth away from true vertical balance, a silent insurance against time itself. The city streets that connected these monuments were monitored with equal care. During the construction of his new capital, Shah Jahanabad, the emperor would walk through the unfinished red sandstone streets at midnight, accompanied by only a single torchbearer, to check the precise alignment of the market stalls and ensure the vistas remained unobstructed. The rhythmic sound of his royal leather slippers echoed softly off the fresh sandstone arches, while the crackling pine torch threw long, dancing shadows across the empty dirt roads. To shield the inhabitants of these palaces from the constant noise of the capital, the interior architecture utilized advanced acoustic reductions. The ceilings of the royal bedrooms inside the Delhi Red Fort were curved into shallow, undulating plaster waves. This structural choice naturally trapped and scattered human voices, preventing private conversations from echoing outside the chambers. A king speaks in a normal, quiet tone, noticing how his words seem to dissolve instantly into the soft curves of the ivory-white plaster roof, creating an absolute oasis of privacy. The selection of these flawless building materials required an unyielding quality standard at the source. Inspectors stationed at the distant desert marble quarries of Makrana tested individual stone blocks by striking them with a specialized wooden mallet. Blocks with hidden internal structural cracks made a dull, heavy thud, while perfect stone rang out with a clear, bell-like musical tone. A quarry worker holds his breath as the mallet hits a 10-ton block, listening closely for that pure musical note that signals geological perfection. This love for controlled environments was shared by Queen Mumtaz Mahal, who ordered the creation of a small greenhouse made entirely of thick, emerald-tinted Persian glass panels. Inside this protected enclosure, she cultivated rare medicinal herbs and delicate flora away from the dry, destructive winds of the northern plains. One can almost imagine the queen sitting inside this soothing green glass room, while the outside world is blindingly white with summer heat, breathing in the damp, fresh scent of mint and wet earth. To ensure that even the air of worship carried a sense of luxury, Shah Jahan ordered a small amount of crushed musk pod oil to be mixed directly into the lime mortar when building the walls of the Moti Masjid, the Pearl Mosque. This ensured that whenever the stone seams were warmed by the summer sun, they would release a faint, rich aroma of musk. A worshipper presses his forehead against the warm white marble pillar, noticing the subtle scent rising from the stone. The loop that began with the arrival of the dynasty was fully resolved in these monuments of stone. In his final years, imprisoned within the fort by his son Aurangzeb, Shah Jahan spent his solitary days sitting quietly in the Musamman Burj, an octagonal marble tower. From this high window, he possessed a distant, perfectly framed view of the Taj Mahal across the river loop. The old man, wrapped in a warm wool shawl, watched the white marble dome change slowly from a pale blue at dawn to a deep, peaceful gold at sunset, finding solace in the permanent symmetry of the world he had built. The memory endured for centuries. When the high administrative duties of the empire came to a rest, the court turned its focus to the slow, luxurious appreciation of art, music, and the changing seasons. The culture of Hindustan was deeply intertwined with the natural rhythms of the land, celebrating the arrival of the life-giving rains and the blooming of spring with a series of sensory-rich traditions. These seasonal rituals were designed to soothe the mind, enveloping the residents in an atmosphere of warmth, comfort, and nostalgic joy. The arrival of the summer monsoons transformed the outdoor living spaces into stages of deep celebration. During the traditional Julan festival, royal women hung massive wooden swings directly from the sturdy branches of ancient mango trees. Attendants decorated the heavy suspension ropes with thick, wet garlands of freshly plucked jasmine blossoms. A princess swings gently into the dark, protective tree canopy, feeling a sudden, welcoming drop in temperature as the cool evening air rushes past. The refreshing aroma of the first rain hitting the parched earth mixes with the sweet scent of the crushed jasmine flowers, creating an absolute oasis of natural relief. This love for cooling luxuries was mirrored in the exclusive, women-led Mina Bazaar festivals held within the palace courtyards. To combat the residual heat of the afternoon, attendants served refreshing drinks crafted from crushed pomegranates and sweet vetiver syrup. These beverages were poured from massive, chased silver flagons that were packed to the brim with clean river ice. A guest lifts a heavy, frosty silver cup to her lips, watching large beads of condensation slide slowly down the intricate metal patterns in the warm evening air, feeling the instant cold radiate through her fingers. The musical landscape of the evening court was engineered with an equal dedication to acoustic comfort. Master instrument makers developed the surbahar, a massive stringed instrument featuring a bass crafted from an extraordinarily large, dried desert gourd. It was designed specifically to play deep, slow, and prolonged bass notes that would linger within the high marble audience halls. The first stroke of a steel string on the giant gourd produces a low, resonant rumble that vibrates gently through the stone floorboards for 20 seconds before fading smoothly into the darkness, calming the thoughts of all who listen. To prepare the palace for these nightly gatherings, servants filled the central garden fountain tanks every afternoon with thousands of gallons of clean well water mixed with pure damask rose oil. As the fountains began to play, the mist vaporized gently in the air, allowing the evening breeze to carry the fragrance across the open verandas. Standing downwind from the marble structure, a courtier feels a fine, cool mist touch his face, carrying the intense, sweet aroma of 10,000 crushed blossoms that relaxes his senses after a long day of statecraft. When the seasons shifted to welcome the spring, the court celebrated Jashan-e-Baharan, the spring festival. To mark this time of renewal, the entire assembly wore luxurious silk robes dyed with precious saffron filaments, creating a rolling visual sea of bright yellow and orange textiles that filled the sandstone palaces. A nobleman smooths down his bright saffron sash, noticing the unique, slightly bitter, medicinal scent of the luxury dye that clings permanently to the woven threads, a fragrant reminder of the wealth and artistry of the realm. The final ritual before the royal household went to rest was the preparation of a warm, comforting nightcap. Kitchen artisans manually ground blanched almonds on heavy stone slabs, mixing the rich paste into fresh, warm milk, along with 2 threads of saffron and a single drop of wild honey. A young prince holds a small, unglazed terracotta cup of this warm, golden liquid in his hands, watching the steady steam rise against the dark silk bed curtains as the rich beverage warms his body and prepares his mind for a deep, undisturbed sleep. During the quiet midday hours, the women of the palace spent their time sifting dry pink rose petals onto broad white linen sheets spread across the shaded stone floors. They carefully separated the pristine blossoms to be used for stuffing the luxury silk cushions that lined the imperial sleeping berths. The soft, rustling sound of thousands of dry leaves sliding across the clean white cloth fills the private, cool chambers, releasing a continuous wave of sweet floral aroma that encourages a restful afternoon nap. In the dark cellars beneath the kitchens, the preparation of frozen treats moved at a similarly steady, hypnotic pace. Chefs utilized heavy lead containers placed inside rotating wooden barrels, packed tightly with saltpeter and mountain ice, to slowly churn fresh fruit juices into smooth, frozen sorbets without using direct heat. A kitchen boy rhythmically turns a wooden crank in the cool dark, listening to the soft, predictable crunch of the salted ice packing tightly around a core of frozen mango pulp. For the private entertainment of the queen, performers utilized zithers strung with thick strands of braided silk instead of traditional metal wire. This material choice produced an exceptionally soft, muted, and intimate tone that did not carry past the high courtyard walls. A musician's fingers slide across the soft silk string, generating a warm, round note that floats gently into the dark garden arches without disturbing the guards sleeping nearby. During the cold Delhi winters, the palace rooms were kept comfortable by kangras, beautifully carved copper pans filled with slow-burning oak charcoal. The artisans covered the hot coals in a thick layer of clean white ash, a technique that prevented any smoke from escaping while allowing a wave of deep, odorless heat to radiate through the dark room. A scribe places his cold hands an inch away from the carved copper screen, feeling the soothing warmth thaw his fingers. As formal meetings concluded at the end of the day, courtiers practiced a quiet gesture of mutual respect. Instead of shaking hands, they offered each other a single green cardamom pod drawn from a small, hinged gold box. They chewed the aromatic seed slowly to sweeten their breath before parting for the night. An old minister opens his tiny gold box, the small green pod cracking open to reveal dark, intensely fragrant seeds that signal the end of the day's labor. And yet, even amid this luxury, life continued in total quiet. The scale of that world is astonishing. The true measure of an empire's legacy lies not in the territory it conquers, but in the knowledge it preserves across the vast expanse of time. To enter the imperial library, or kitabkhana, in the deep hours of the night is to leave behind the temporary conflicts of the surface world and step into a sanctuary of collective human thought. The Royal Archive housed over 24,000 precious manuscripts bound in fine leather and guarded like ancient treasures. Here, under a vast canopy of stars, master scholars and calligraphers worked through the night, tracing the journeys of the human soul and the movements of the cosmos. The soundscape of this intellectual haven was defined by an absolute, reverent silence, broken only by the gentlest mechanics of writing. Scribes worked steadily at low wooden tables by the soft, warm glow of flickering beeswax candles. The gentle, dry scratch of a thick reed pen tracing an elegant Persian curve across a smooth sheet of cream silk paper breaks the absolute midnight quiet. These pens were meticulously carved by masters underwater, a traditional technique that prevented the delicate organic fibers from splitting during intensive use. The air in the room was dense, with the clean, deep aroma of fresh water-based ink anchoring the mind in the singular act of preservation. This dedication to scholarship served as a powerful cultural bridge across the subcontinent. Under the direct patronage of the court, Muslim and Hindu scholars spent years sitting side by side in the library, translating the ancient Sanskrit epic, the Mahabharata, into classical Persian. They renamed this magnificent synthesis the Razmnama, or the Book of War, decorating its margins with brilliant gold leaf and vivid mineral illustrations. An old pundit whispers the inner mystical meaning of a Sanskrit verse, while a Persian scribe meticulously matches the complex thought with elegant script by torchlight. Their shared labor turned historical friction into a shared, harmonious legacy. The collection was guarded against the destructive elements of the climate through a meticulous application of natural chemistry. The library archives smelled intensely of dried cedar oil and crushed cloves, a fragrant shield devised by the archivists. Scribes sprinkled these dry spices carefully between the precious pages to act as a natural insect repellent and a preservative against the intense monsoon humidity. Opening a heavy leather book cover to find a page written 2 centuries prior releases a warm, comforting wave of clove and old cedar wood fragrance directly into the scholar's face, a tangible breath of the past. The study of the heavens moved in perfect harmony with this textual preservation. Royal astronomers utilized massive, heavy astrolabes cast from single blocks of solid brass to track the night sky. These instruments featured moving plates carved with thousands of tiny star markers, allowing them to calculate time down to the single second by tracking the bright blue point of Sirius. An astronomer lifts the cold, heavy circle of brass to his eye, aligning his sight lines with the star hanging high over the dark fort wall, finding a sense of stable order in the clockwork of the cosmos. This fascination with cosmic scale was reflected in the personal possessions of the rulers. Akbar owned a mechanical celestial sphere crafted from solid silver, driven by an intricate internal water balance weight system that clicked softly as it moved. The device displayed the shifting positions of the sun, the moon, and the 5 known planets with absolute mathematical precision. A young prince stares at the tiny silver moon, rotating a fraction of an inch inside the mechanism, while the water drops let out a soft, regular liquid tick in his private study room, a soothing baseline that matches his calm breathing. The preservation of the oldest texts required an unyielding devotion to structural softness. The library kept its rarest Sanskrit manuscripts, wrapped carefully in squares of thick, unwashed yellow silk. This specific fabric was selected because it contained natural sarrasin oils, which prevented the ancient, dried palm leaves from becoming brittle or cracking over generations. A scholar unrolls the soft yellow silk bundle to reveal a stack of dark palm leaves carved with ancient geometric characters, 3,000 years old, his fingers tracing the deep grooves with a light, respectful touch. The final preservation step for these royal manuscripts was conducted by the master bookbinders. They finished the edges of the paper sheets by applying ultra-thin layers of genuine gold leaf, using a highly polished green agate stone to burnish the metal. This manual burnishing process was continued until the gold formed a smooth, dust-proof, and moisture-resistant shield along the side of the book. The binder slides the smooth agate stone across the edge of the closed volume, making the gold shine like a fresh mirror in the quiet workshop, a beautiful barrier against the passage of decades. The perspective of those who recorded this history was explicitly focused on deep time. Court genealogists recorded the imperial family lineages on massive scrolls of linen paper that stretched over 30 feet long, unrolling them completely only during the winter solstice to remind the court of their brief place in history. An old man slowly unrolls the vast scroll across a dark woolen carpet, his finger tracing names that have been dust for 500 years while a winter fire burns low in the hearth. To maintain their focus during the oppressive summer months, the scholars utilized heavy inkstones carved from single pieces of dark blue slate. These stones featured deep, circular inkwells that naturally kept the fluid cool and prevented it from thickening during hot afternoons. A scholar touches the cool, dark slate of his inkwell, finding an instant sensory comfort in its icy texture while the outside wind howls with summer heat. High above the archives, the rulers themselves participated in this nightly observation of the universe. Jahangir had a high, unroofed white marble terrace constructed at the very top of the Lahore fort, where he spent his nights lying flat on his back on a soft silk mat, observing meteors and recording them in his diary. The ruler of India lies perfectly still under a vast canopy of darkness, writing a sentence with a small brush as a shooting star tracks silently across the sky. The state decrees were filed away in heavy copper tubes lined with dry cotton wool, sliding into dark stone niches carved directly into the thick, temperature-stable interior walls of the fortress. The memory endured for centuries. All empires move through seasons, shifting gradually from the vibrant energy of their noon to the quiet, poetic acceptance of their twilight. The historical twilight of the dynasty was not defined by a sudden, chaotic collapse, but by a slow, gentle deceleration, a receding tide that allowed the material world of Hindustan to return softly to its natural state. As the Grand Central Administration grew quiet over the course of the 18th century, the vast networks of palaces, roads, and gardens began to adapt to a slower, more solitary existence. This transition from imperial movement to natural silence was vividly felt in the short-lived capital of Fatehpur Sikri. When Akbar abandoned the grand sandstone city due to a severe regional water scarcity, the massive artificial lakes that once supplied the court slowly filled with soft, river-borne silt. Within a decade, wild lotus flowers completely covered the water's surface, turning the reservoirs into quiet, green sanctuaries. A solitary shepherd leads his goats past the empty, high sandstone palace arches at twilight, watching a single dragonfly land motionless on a giant green lotus leaf in the old reservoir. The quiet wind whispering through the abandoned audience halls. In the late 18th century, this sense of quiet isolation settled deeply over the rulers themselves, confined entirely to the inner apartments of the Red Fort in Delhi. The later kings spent their solitary days writing Urdu poetry about the transience of human power and the fleeting nature of earthly glory. An elderly king dips his pen by an open, arched window at sunset, listening to the gentle wind rustle through a dry garden courtyard that his grandfathers once filled with sweet rosewater. His world had shrunk to the width of the fort walls, yet his mind found peace in the rhythm of verse. The natural landscape itself mirrored this imperial retreat. Over decades of weakened central authority, the Yamuna River naturally migrated its main channel away from the rear walls of the Agra fort. It left behind a wide, peaceful meadow of green grass where majestic warships and royal barges once anchored. Standing on a high sandstone balcony where emperors once looked down at rushing, powerful currents, a modern watchman looks out at a silent sea of waving pasture grass and slow-moving, grazing cows, the air filled with the scent of wild clover. The grand economic lifelines of the realm adapted with equal softness to the changing times. As the royal court shrunk, the legendary silk weavers of Murshidabad gradually stopped the demanding production of gold-threaded brocades and heavy imperial velvets. They returned instead to manufacturing simple, soft, undyed cotton sheets used by the local people for sleeping. A weaver changes his loom setup in the morning light, pulling away a sharp strand of gold tinsel to thread a spool of thick, cream-colored cotton thread, his hands moving with the same ancient precision to create an item of pure, tactile comfort. The physical remnants of the grand imperial movements were absorbed gently into domestic life. The massive, gold-embroidered silk tents that once formed the traveling canvas cities of the emperors were eventually sold off to regional governors. Rather than being used for military campaigns, these grand canopies were cut down into small, practical curtains to shade family verandas from the midday sun. A child in a provincial town falls asleep on a warm afternoon behind a faded blue silk curtain that once sheltered Akbar the Great, the historic fabric moving gently under a light evening breeze. In the south, the thousands of marble fountains in the Shalimar Gardens of Lahore gradually stopped playing as the old clay water conduits filled with the deep roots of ancient trees. The water inside the basins became perfectly still, collecting a dense layer of green velvety moss that softened the rigid lines of the stone channels. A soft drop of winter rain falls into a mossy stone basin, creating a single quiet ripple across a pool that has not sprayed water for 50 years. A peaceful return to complete stillness. The language of the Twilight Court shifted naturally from elite, formal Persian to Urdu, a language born organically within the moving army camps, combining Persian vocabulary with the soft, melodic grammar of local Hindi dialects. A poet reads his verses in a crowded night market by the warm light of crackling oil lamps. His words understood and deeply appreciated by both the high court noble and the poor street vendor. The language became a shared sanctuary, wrapping the community in a familiar, comforting rhythm of speech. In the provincial sabahs, the old scribes stopped sending regular daily journals back to the distant capital. They closed their heavy, velvet-bound ledger books and used their remaining blank sheets of premium royal paper to record local folk tales and shifting weather patterns. An old scribe sits on his wooden porch, writing a traditional story about monsoon frog spirits on a thick, handmade sheet, finding fulfillment in the small-scale lore of his neighborhood. The great bronze gongs that once regulated the hourly rhythm of the court were left unpolished in the final decades, accumulating a pale green copper patina that muted their tone. A servant strikes an old green filmed disc at midnight, its sound now a low, soothing thrum that disappears instantly into the quiet, empty halls rather than a sharp ring. The ancestral art of the painters was preserved with equal care, wrapped in thick, crimson velvet squares and buried inside deep iron chests to keep them safe from the conflicts of the era. An artist's grandson opens one of these old chests in a quiet basement, pulling away the heavy cloth to reveal a perfectly preserved miniature painting of a golden court, its gold leaf still shining brightly in the dark. Meanwhile, the remaining bolts of superfine imperial muslin stored in the fort treasuries slowly turned to dust over decades, their delicate spiderweb-thin fibers breaking down naturally back into the organic soil from which they came. A modern archivist lifts a heavy chest lid, finding only a soft, cloud-like powder of white cotton fiber that floats away on a light breeze. The very last Mughal emperor, Bahadur Shah Zafar, wrote his final poems using a simple piece of burnt charcoal directly onto the white lime walls of his cell, focusing his mind on the peaceful return of the soul to its creator as the dim twilight faded into total darkness. The great halls grew quiet, leaving the stone to speak to the wind. The empires of men flow and recede like the waters of the great rivers, but the stone monuments they leave behind remain anchored to the earth, untouched by the passage of time. As the political struggles and grand timelines of history fade into the shadows, the physical architecture of Hindustan stands entirely silent under the stars. The white marble and red sandstone have outlived the thrones, the decrees, and the armies, transitioning into timeless sanctuaries of absolute stillness, where the only movement is the slow tracking of the moon across the sky. This architectural transfiguration is most profound at the edge of the Yamuna River, where the Taj Mahal rests in the deep hours of the night. The specific type of white marble used to construct this monument, sourced from the distant quarries of Makrana, contains thousands of microscopic crystals of dolomite stone. These unique minerals naturally absorb and refract the ambient moonbeams, causing the entire building to glow with a translucent, pale blue light in the darkness. Standing alone in the absolute silence of midnight, a viewer watches the massive stone dome appear completely weightless, floating like a quiet cloud against the dark sky, an eternal monument to a love that has long transcended the human world. A few miles away, the red sandstone city of Fatehpur Sikri remains completely intact, but entirely uninhabited. A magnificent stage preserved in a state of permanent rest. Its vast, open courtyards and high, sweeping arches experience a profound acoustic silence whenever the wind drops at twilight. Walking across the giant red sandstone plaza that once held thousands of courtiers, one hears only the soft, rhythmic sound of his own slow breathing. The empty palaces stand side by side, their carved surfaces catching the faint starlight, free from the weight of human ambition and administrative worry. Beside these stone monuments, the slow-moving waters of the Yamuna River continue to flow past the rear walls of the fortresses, their currents moving at the exact same physical speed today as they did 3 centuries ago. The river acts as a silent mirror of time, reflecting the changing dynasties without retaining their scars. Watching a single dead leaf glide smoothly down the dark blue water, passing the white marble foundations of history without pausing, one realizes how fleeting human lifetimes are compared to the steady, unhurried elements of the natural world. The wildlife that once animated the imperial gardens has also returned to its ancient, uncomplicated routines. The Asian coal birds that roost in the old neem and mango trees of the remaining palace grounds still let out their long, musical, rising calls at dawn today, utilizing the exact same acoustic patterns recorded by the first emperor in his memoirs. A traveler waking up near an old sandstone ruin hears this familiar avian melody echoing through the crisp morning air, connecting his modern senses directly to the sounds that woke the sovereigns of the past. Time has also dealt gently with the exterior of the strongholds, softening their defensive character into art. The red sandstone of the Agra fort walls has been systematically smoothed over the centuries by the gentle friction of monsoon rains and dust-laden summer winds. This natural weathering process has rounded off the sharp corners originally carved by the masons, turning the defensive bastions into fluid, organic shapes, running a hand over the massive fort wall. A visitor finds that the red stone feels as smooth and round as a river pebble washed by water for generations, a hard material softened by time. Inside the palaces, the grand spaces of power have returned to a state of meditative purity. The private audience hall, known as the Diwan-i-Khas, which once housed the precious gold and jewel-encrusted peacock throne, stands entirely empty tonight under the stars. Its white marble pillars catch the faint silver light of the night sky without any human presence to disturb their alignment. A cool night breeze blows softly through the open marble arches, making tiny dust motes dance within a single shaft of starlight where a golden throne once sat, a peaceful vacuum where history has come to rest. The delicate artwork embedded within these walls remains equally untouched by the decay of the centuries. The semi-precious stones inlaid into the white marble of Mumtaz Mahal's tomb, including the deep blue lapis lazuli, the green jasper, and the rich red carnelian, have not lost a single shade of their color over 300 years. Looking closely at the marble wall by the low, warm light of a single lantern, one sees a small carnelian rose that looks as fresh, vibrant, and clean as if it had been carved this morning. Its beauty preserved beneath a flawless polish. In the surrounding country fields, the roots of the ancient mango orchards planted by Jahangir still reach deep into the soil layers that were fertilized by the old court centuries ago. Many of these living trees are direct descendants of the original imperial groves. An old farmer picks a heavy green gold mango from a rough, twisted branch. Its sticky sap, smelling exactly like the fruit that was once served on chased silver plates to the princes of the realm, a sweet living link to the past. The deep stepwells scattered across the northern plains continue to collect cool groundwater in their lowest, brick-lined chambers. Regardless of the blistering summer heat that bakes the surface of the earth, the temperature within these subterranean stone staircases remains an unchanging 65 degrees. Looking down the long flight of stone steps into the deep well, an observer sees the blue night sky perfectly reflected in a still, clear pane of cold water below, a hidden sanctuary of permanent calm. The great rulers themselves remain in a state of undisturbed peace, sealed away from the movements of the modern public. The underground crypts where they are buried are situated in deep, brick-vaulted chambers beneath the stone monuments, where the internal air has been completely still for centuries. A thick, cool stone floor separates the busy, passing footsteps of modern visitors above from the profound, eternal silence of the ancient kings sleeping below. Their journeys complete. Pale green layers of moss slowly fill the carved Persian calligraphy on the gates, softening the edges of the lettering and wrapping the empire in a final velvety cushion of rest. The scale of that world is astonishing. Now, the journey through the halls of history reaches its definitive close. The grand tapestry of the past, with its marble gardens, silent rivers, and starlit libraries, softens into a single, distant memory. The names, the faces, and the grand structures of the old world dissolve into a quiet, warm haze, leaving behind only a profound sense of peace. The empire of the mind has come to rest, and the timeline of human effort fades completely into the dark, comforting shadows of the present hour. Every element of the world eventually returns to a state of quiet dust. The struggles for power, the magnificent architecture, and the beautiful lines of poetry written by charcoal light are all held safely within the unmoving embrace of time. There is nothing more you need to remember. There are no more journeys to plan, No more lessons to absorb, and no more thoughts to manage. The heavy weight of the historical journey lifts away from your shoulders, leaving a deep, weightless tranquility in its place. The physical world outside your window sinks into an absolute, timeless stillness. One can almost picture the white mist rising naturally from the ancient riverbeds, blanketing the fields and the ruins in a cool, damp layer of protection. The gentle breeze moves softly through the dark leaves of the trees, a rhythmic, soothing whisper that matches the slow, natural cadence of your own breathing. The darkness of the room surrounds you like a heavy silk curtain, sealing out the worries of the waking world and creating a sanctuary of pure safety. Your body sinks deeper into the mattress, finding a state of complete, heavy relaxation. Release the final details of the day, letting your mind drift into the silent, dark spaces of peaceful rest. Your breath is steady, light, and unhurried. The silence of the ancient stone monuments settles into your heart, grounding you in this perfect, quiet moment. Sleep comes smoothly, like a slow-moving river, gliding past white marble foundations into the infinite night. Sleep well, and good night.